Para mim é efetivamente uma imensa honra poder estar a moderar esta conferência. Agradeço à organização o convite. Cumpre-me apresentar o professor António Nóvoa, que não precisa de apresentações, mas como eu costumo dizer, podemos sempre relembrar, fazer alguns sublinhados. Vamos lá. Então, o professor António Nóvoa, Sampaio da Nóvoa, é reitor emérito da Universidade de Lisboa. Penso que isso sabemos todos. Nasceu em Valença em 1954, por isso se jubilou em 12 de dezembro de 2024, numa cerimónia absolutamente linda, fabulosa. É doutor em Ciências da Educação pela Universidade de Geneve, na Suíça, e doutor em História Moderna e Contemporânea pela Universidade de Paris IV, Sorbonne. Iniciou a sua carreira académica ainda na Universidade de Geneve como assistente e a partir dos meados dos anos 80 é professor na Faculdade de Psicologia e de Ciências da Educação da Universidade de Lisboa. Desde meados da década de 90, professor catedrático. É professor convidado de várias universidades internacionais, nomeadamente Wisconsin, Paris 5, Oxford, Columbia, New York, Brasília e Federal do Rio de Janeiro. Entre 96 e 99, foi consultor para os assuntos da educação da Casa Civil do Presidente da República, Jorge Sampaio. Entre 2000 e 2003, é presidente da International Standing Conference for the History of Education, ISH. Em 2012, preside as comemorações do Dia de Portugal, de Camões e das comunidades portuguesas, a convite do então Primeiro-Ministro Cavaco Silva. Entre 2006 e 2013, é reitor da Universidade de Lisboa, conduzindo o processo de fusão dessa universidade com a Universidade Técnica. Em 2014, esteve no Brasil numa missão internacional da Unesco, junto do governo brasileiro. É doutor honoris causa pela Universidade do Algarve, pela Universidade de Brasília, pela Universidade Lusófona, pela Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro e pela Universidade Federal de Santa Maria. Em 2016 foi candidato às eleições presidenciais, tendo obtido 23% dos votos. A partir de 2018 e até 2021, foi representante permanente de Portugal junto da Unesco, tendo dado origem à publicação de um livro com um título muito parecido, não é? De um relatório com um título muito parecido com o título deste encontro e que também inspirará a conferência de hoje. De qualquer modo, queria ainda dizer-vos que o professor António Nóvoa possui centenas de publicações de grande relevância em diversas línguas e países, 12 países. Essas centenas de publicações versam sobretudo a profissão docente, um trabalho extremamente importante que nos permite pôr de parte a ideia de que os professores são um meio sem refração, sem autoria, sem identidade e que podemos acabar as nossas investigações e logo a seguir dizer os professores devem fazer isto. É que eu concluí, não é? E, portanto, é muito importante este estudo, tem sido extremamente importante. A educação escolar também, a educação comparada, como aqui já foi sublinhado, e a história da educação, evidentemente. Tem tido um papel fundamental na internacionalização, e como Presidente da Sociedade Portuguesa de Ciências, tenho que o sublinhar, teve um papel fundamental na internacionalização da investigação em educação realizada em Portugal. Temos muito orgulho. em podermos dizer que somos do mesmo país do professor António Nóvoa. Bom, hoje temos a honra de o ter connosco, sempre com grande abertura e com grande disponibilidade, que também é preciso sublinhar, e vamos, por isso, ouvir então a conferência com o título Renovar o contrato social para a educação, navegando em futuros possíveis. Muito obrigada mais uma vez.
Good morning to all, and thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you, Amélia, for your generous words. Let me say that it's a pleasure to participate once again in an event of the World Council of Comparative Education Societies. I greet all its members, represented, of course, by its president, even if it's not here with us, Dr. Kanich Kabedi, and also by its past president, here with us, Professor Nedri-Thérèse Aciel Lumumba, and with all those responsible for the organization of this symposium in Lisbon, António Teodoro, Nuno Fraga, Carla, everyone who is involved in this organization. Thank you very much for your invitation. Also a word of friendship to Paul Speller, whom I worked in 2014 when I was in Brasilia, and he was Secretary of State for Higher Education. It's a long friendship, and I'm very happy that he can be with us here today. I will do a very short presentation, in fact, a presentation of the report, in a sense, or my vision of the report of the UNESCO. In fact, as Amélia already told, the title of this symposium, the title of your symposium, naturally refers to the UNESCO latest report, Reimagining Our Futures Together, and the subtitle, A New Social Contract for Education, also published in Portuguese, both in Brazil and in Portugal, and to the countless reflections, debates, texts that have been published since 2021, in the last 4 years, all over the world, in the discussion, in the critical discussion of this report. So, of course, that I understand this invitation from you, extended to me, as related to the role I played in the production of this report, also as chair of the Research Drafting Committee of the International Commission of the Futures of Education, that was shared by, at that moment, the President of Ethiopia. Some of the reflections that I'm going to share with you have already been published in the Journal of the International Bureau of Education, of the BIE in Geneva, and the journal Prospects, mainly in 2 articles that I published in this journal. I think that the second one is not yet online, but will be online in the next days. The first one with the title, Renewing the Social Contract for Education, a Personal Point of View on the UNESCO Report. And the second one, which is the result of a series of lectures and conferences, also here in Lisbon, organized by the UNESCO Chair on the Futures of Education of the University of Lisbon, with the title Educating in Common for a Common Humanity. What I'm going to say to you, in a sense, it's already in these 2 texts, or in these 2 documents. I will try to summarize some of the views of these 2 articles and a lot of other reflections. With regard, in a very simple way, I'm going to say it's very simple. In a sense, it's maybe even simplistic, but I will do it very shortly, and of course then we can discuss after my presentation, or the next days some of these ideas. In a very simple, even simplistic idea, the social contract of modernity, the social contract of educational modernity that was constructed in the 19th century around all the world was built in three dimensions or in three main ideas or concepts. The first one, of course, was the state intervention through the imposition of compulsory schooling, which was named in the Anglophone countries by mass schooling, a concept that is very difficult to translate both into Portuguese or Spanish or French. No? The idea of mass schooling related with compulsory schooling and with education playing a central role in all our countries in the formation of a national citizenship. The project of creating a national citizenship through the extension of schooling by the state intervention was, of course, one of the pillars, one of the main dimensions of the social contract of modernity. Many people talk about this. Andy Green wrote extensively about this. Also, Pierre Bourdieu wrote extensively about this. That's something that we all know. The second dimension of the social contract of modernity, it was the creation of a specific space and time, school buildings for the education of children. In a sense, to take the children from families and from societies and to put them in school buildings that, even if it seems strange for all of us, were constructed for the first time at that moment. The first school buildings constructed to be school buildings were constructed around mid-19th century, not before that. And these school buildings have a characteristic, the idea that they were organized around the cell. And this cell was the classroom. So the school buildings were not really school buildings. It was a kind of addition of classrooms. There were school buildings for 4 classrooms, for 8 classrooms, for 16 classrooms, what our colleagues in America call a neck-crack or cellular design of the school buildings, and that maintains in most of the cases until today. And of course, the third characteristic, the third pillar of the social contract of modernity was the consolidation of a school model that was already prepared before, in the 17th century, in the 18th century, but that was finally consolidated in the 19th century, what some other authors call the school form, or even other authors call the school grammar or the grammar of schooling. I call it the school model. And what John Dewey called in a very important text from the beginning of the century, the 20th century, the mechanics of school organization, which of course has become dominant around the world. One of the most interesting things in the history of education is how quickly, in the second half of the 19th century, this school model was diffused around the world, around all our countries, in a very short period of time, namely through the action of the normal schools, of the teacher education schools, of the curriculum, etc., etc. I'm not going to enter into the details because you all know this history of the construction of the social contract of modernity. When we look at this social contract of modernity, when we look at the history of schooling over the past 150 or 200 years, it's very easy to talk about this history as a history of success, or a history of failure. Both histories can be told. We can say, and of course that we are right in saying it, that school has protected children and young people, taking them off the streets, out of work, out of child exploitation, and placing them in an institution where they can grow up and be educated in a safe environment. The idea of the school and the school building is to create a protective and a safe environment for the education of these children. And they are right, of course, in telling the story of the school, the history of the school in the last 2 centuries as a brilliant story, a story of success, where we come until today. But we know that many people, many authors, many of us also sometimes tell the story of the school, or the history of schooling, as a history of failure. And those who tell it as a history of failure take our attention to the idea that still today, 2 centuries after compulsory schooling laws, around 249 million of children and adults are still out of the school in the world. Something like 15% of this age group are not still in school. And this is a failure, of course, a failure of policies of this social contract of educational modernity. It's a huge number. It's an unacceptable number that 15% of children and adults are not in school in the year 2025. But if you look at the UNESCO statistics, we can also say that it's a story of failure because approximately half of the students that are in school, that attend school, leave school poorly prepared for the world and for life. It means that not only 15% of our children are still out of school, but even in the 85% that are in school, half of them leave school at the age of 15 or 16 or 17, very poorly prepared. And this is, of course, a failure in the project of compulsory schooling, of mass education, of school for all, of education for all, whatever you can say as the main expressions of the social contract for modernity. When we look at the things that are written today about school, of course that those, which is my case, consider that the school is a history of success, need to talk about the need to protect the school. Schools need to be protected as a public good, as a common good. Schools need to be protected from many other tendencies, many things that are around the world. We need to protect this institution that is absolutely crucial for the future of humanity. But those who consider that we are facing a history of failure, transform the school. We cannot continue to talk about education for all, and 200 years after, we are not able to educate all the people. We are educating you are educating well less than half of the children, less than half of the young people, and so something needs to be transformed in this school. And so, in a sense, we need a double movement, a movement of protecting the school and a movement of transforming the school. And I believe that the process of renewing the social contract for education needs to have both these two tensions. The tension of protecting the institution, protecting the school as a public institution, but also the need to transform this school. And that's what I will try to present to you. The first movement is a movement of protecting the school. And we can ask, of course, protecting the school from what? What is in a sense causing dangers, causing difficulties to the schools? And my answer, which is again very simple, even very simplistic, is that we need to protect the school from futuristic visions and delusions, ranging from the idea that everything will be done virtually, everything will be done online, everything will be done through technologies, to artificial intelligence, and so on, even if, of course, technological transformations are very important for schools, but ranging from this idea that everything will be done online, virtually, to discourses that are very popular nowadays about what some people call the ubiquity of learning. Right? The idea that we can learn everywhere, we can learn at all times, we can learn at home, we can learn in the streets, we can learn online, a kind of ubiquity of learning that, of course, is creating difficulties to the schools as an institution. And for me, schools need to be protected also from this movement of privatization, not in the traditional sense of privatization, but in the sense of education as a private good, something that belongs to each one of us, which of course is true, but it's not the whole true, because it's also a collective good. It's also a common good. And school, what one of our colleagues from the United States, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant thinkers of education nowadays, David Library, called also a kind of consumeristic approach of education, as if education was only a kind of relation of each person with its own education, and goes to ideas of competitions and other that were already presented here in the beginning of this session. And so, yes, schools need to be protected and defended as a unique and irreplaceable institution for the education of children. An institution that is different from home, that in a sense is different from society, because the importance of school is not a kind of extension of home, it's not an extension of society, it's to be a different institution, a different places where different things can happen in a human context of human relationships, a place of culture and encounter, a place of cultural and relational encounters between human beings. And that dimension of schools as this institution needs to be protected. And for me, talking about the renewing of the social contract for education, it's always having in mind this need to protect schools as this human institution. And this point allows me to dissipate a misconception about the UNESCO report. And the misconception in this idea, we never intended to be a prospective exercise or an anticipation of the future. It has never been our idea, much less to impose a vision on the future or to try to control some of the features of the future. Quite the opposite. We always wanted to talk about the futures in the plural. And we wanted this report to be constructed through dialogue and participation with people from all over the world. We listened. During the construction and the redaction of the report, we listened over 1 million people around the world. And we never draft this report based on a kind of an internal logic of a commission of experts. It was not a commission of experts writing a report in some room in Paris or in some other place. It was the construction of a dialogue with over 1 million people around the world, bringing ideas, bringing conceptions, bringing projects, bringing experiences, and trying to put them together in a document. We took as our guide one of the ideas of one of the members of the International Commission, in fact, one of the most influential members of the International Commission, our colleague Arjun Hapadurai, who wrote, and this was for us a kind of a guide, education and thinking about the future of education. Education and thinking about the future of education can help us to design our own transformations rather than to simply react to transformations that are imposed upon us. This was our intention as International Commission, and not to create one more report of experts, of a commission of experts, etc., etc. I told you to protect the school, but I told also to you to transform the school. And the question is how to transform the school in the context of this idea of renewing the social contract. What does it mean? We have adopted in the Commission, and also in my case, in my reflections, we have adopted the concept of metamorphosis. Metamorphosis in the idea of transforming the form of the schools. Metamorphosis, transforming the form of the school. Maintaining the school, protecting the school, and transforming its form. In the sense that Edgar Morin, this brilliant philosopher of education that last week celebrated 104 years of age and is still thinking and giving us very important ideas, in the sense that Edgar Morin used this concept of metamorphosis. He didn't use this concept for education, but for climate changes and climate justice. But I appropriated this concept of metamorphosis to speak about the school. And I quote Edgar Morin. He told us, the idea of metamorphosis is richer than the idea of revolution because it maintains its transformative radicality, but links to conservation. Conservation of life, conservation of the heritage of cultures. And this was the point for us in the renewing of the social contract. It was a radical transformation of the school, but maintaining, protecting this institution that is absolutely central for the future and not going in any futuristic vision, in any delusion about the end of school, the end of teachers, about the creation of something new that we don't know what it is, about the idea that everything will be, in a sense, diffused around many institutions. No, our idea, it's always related to the importance of maintaining, of protecting, of conserving schools, but with a movement for its transformation. And so, going again, and I am sorry for that, going again for a very simplistic vision about the three dimensions of the social contract of modernity, what can we say about the renewing of the social contract for education? We can say, in a sense, that this idea of navigate possible futures is related with the change about the idea of national citizenship. That is, of course, important. And maybe we cannot abandon the idea of national citizenship, but we need to understand this social contract for education as something centered on human rights. And so, as a project of education, that it's more related with human rights and with the protection of human rights and with the idea of the whole humanity and not only related with national citizenship. And so all the report from the first page is written in the idea of what is called in international organizations a human rights approach. And so the idea of a human rights approach goes from the first page until the last page of the report, because for us it is important that in this renewing we can consider not only national citizenship, but also the idea of human rights. Secondly, where we talk about school buildings, and you need to understand this idea of school buildings as a metaphor, we are now facing the idea of new educational environments. The idea that we need to think different, that we need new ways of organizing the space, new ways of organizing the buildings, new ways of organizing the environments where children are going to work, with moments inside schools, moments outside the schools, with a new conception of architectures, as was told by one French philosopher, the stones, they sink, the stones, the idea of the stones, the idea how we organize the space. It's very important for pedagogy, for education, for what we can do and what we cannot do inside a space, inside a context, inside an environment. And so if we want to renew this social contract, we need to renew and to rethink about new educational environments. And finally, where we have a kind of a school model, an uniform model, we now have a kind of diversity of educational situations, a diversity of practices, of pedagogical practices, marked by the idea of the work as a metaphor of the students. The idea that the school is the place where the students are going to work. And work means to read, to study, to write, to research, to solve problems, to do projects. the idea that the schools must be understood not as the place where children are going to listen to the teachers, but are going to work, to engage in work, to engage in a diversity of educational situations, and that work must be one of the main ideas for the transformation of a school model that has been very rigid, that has been very uniform throughout the last 200 years, throughout the development of the social contract of modernity. These principles, I'm going to try to give a more precise, a better precision of these principles of renewing the social contract of education can be translated into the day-to-day life of the schools in 5 words. They are not all in the report, but many of them are in the report, to 5 words beginning with the letter C. Cooperation, convergence, collaboration, conviviality, and communality. And these 5 words are words that are important to understand how we can renew the social contract of education. What can we do in schools? What can teachers do? What is the kind of ideas that we need to develop, that we need to build better for the near future? I will talk very briefly about each one of these 5 ideas to end my intervention and my presentation. First, cooperation, which means pedagogy of cooperation. Pedagogy needs to be seen, needs to be understood mainly as a process of cooperation. Cooperation with teachers, of course. The relation between teachers and students is absolutely crucial. I can even say to you that I'm trying to work with some colleagues in a kind of a crazy idea that probably will not be approved, but we need to try. We are trying to develop the idea, and maybe the World Council could be a good partner in the promotion of this idea. We are talking the idea of trying to inscribe as World Heritage the teacher-education relationship. So, trying to build the teacher-student relationship as a heritage of humanity, and so this is very important. But the social contracts of modernity neglected in a sense the cooperation between students, the cooperation between children, the cooperation between peers. And so we need to understand pedagogy not only as a way of transmitting a culture, not only as a way of transmitting knowledge, but also a way of working together between children, creating the conditions, creating the environments, creating the way of putting children working with children, students working with students in forms of cooperation. We all know that this is one of the oldest ideas of pedagogy, mainly by Célestin Freinet and many others, but we also know that this is very poorly done in our schools, and our schools maintain this school form, this school model, that it's not friendly for the ideas of cooperation. So, pedagogy, the word is cooperation. And these are the five central chapters of the report. If we talk about curriculum, the main idea is convergence. Convergence. Convergence between disciplines, convergence between fields, convergence between different approaches of knowledge, knowing, recognizing that the disciplines are important, but that what really counts today in the curriculum is the different forms of literacy: alphabetic, mathematical, scientific, artistic. That is the mastery of the instruments of knowledge and culture. And we imported this idea of convergence from the scientific world, from our colleagues from the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, that wrote a couple of years ago a very important report called The Third Scientific Revolution, the Revolution of Convergence. The idea that everything that is important in science is today the result of the convergence of different approaches, of different disciplines, of different ways of knowing. What is true for the science is true for the school and for education. We need to go into process of convergence, and this is probably the main idea for the renewing of the social contract for education in the case of curriculum. Because, of course, the modernity of the 19th century imposed a structure of disciplines and a certain taxonomy of disciplines that today need to be revised and, in a sense, reinvented. The third word related with the teaching profession is the idea of collaboration. Is the idea that the teaching professions need to go from a kind of individualistic identity to a more collective identity. Not because we impose it, as our colleague Andy R. Greaves wrote extensively. It's not a contrived collegiality, but it's a collegiality that results from new environments, new curriculums, new pedagogies that allow for the presence of different teachers with different groups of students, with different ways of organizing the work, different ways of doing pedagogy, and so having a major implication for the construction of this collective identity. It's not about obliging teachers to collaborate. It's about to creating the ways of organizing the daily work in a way that these collaborations is absolutely crucial, and it's a way of thinking new forms of identity of the teaching profession, because, as you all know, the social contract for modernity pushed for a very individualistic identity of teachers. Once they are in the classroom, they are inside the classroom, alone with their children. Of course, these individualistic positions comes very, very strongly in the daily work of teachers. The fourth word, it's about schools, is the word conviviality. The recent trend to isolate education to the home or to other private spaces through technological devices, distance learning, is, in my opinion, a major setback for a humanistic vision that seeks to educate everyone with everyone, that seeks to educate in a human context, in a human environment. Schools are places for citizenship, in the broader sense of a kind of citizenship based on human rights, but also a place for conviviality. You probably know that this concept of conviviality was elaborated by Ivan Illich in the 70s. He wrote a book with this title, Conviviality, and you also know probably that in the recent years there are several manifestos for convivial society, and this idea of conviviality needs to be brought inside the schools as a kind of educating in common for a common humanity, which is the title of my recent article in Prospects, the journal of the International Bureau of Education. And so the idea of conviviality, it's very important in times of fragmentation, in times of different violences between cultures, between groups, between different ways of imagining society. And for me, it's one of the main points of the school. And finally, what I call, maybe it's not the best word, but it's the word that came to my mind in preparing this presentation, the idea of the fifth C, the idea of communality, which is very difficult to translate into Portuguese or into French, but I think it can work in the English language. And so the idea that the renewal of the social contract must recognize the importance of education as a common good. And in this report, we insist a lot in the idea of public good, yes, but more yet in the idea of common good. And we define common good as idea of a public good with more presence, with more participation, with more involvement, with the construction of a public space grounded on human rights, a space of participation, of collective decisions, and our idea of communality brings also the participation of the students in the life of the schools, the idea of the youngs having a voice in the way how the schools are organized, and all these reflections about the common was, in fact, probably the most important discussions in the International Commission that wrote the report. Lots of our discussions were about the common, about what it means, about the knowledge commons, a concept that it's very difficult to translate to another language other than the English. And even in the English language, sometimes it's not very easy to understand what is the knowledge commons, about the ideas of a common humanity, about what means to work in common, what means this renewing of the social contract of modernity in terms of a common good, of a common idea, of, as I wrote in my last paper, of educating in common for a common humanity. I cannot bring to you now, because I'm really at the end of my presentation, all these discussions that we have been doing in many of our documents, and mainly in the journal Prospects, because 1 year ago we published a special issue of Prospects only about the idea of the common, that were edited by our colleague Sobi Tawil and another colleague Elena, that were very important as a support for the international commissions. And so, in a sense, all these 5 ideas that I brought to you, all these 5 ideas about cooperation, about convergence, about collaboration, about conviviality, about communality, all these ideas have the idea of common as the central idea that is with all these 5 ideas. And so it means the importance of bounds, of ties, of interconnections that has taken unexpected dimension today as part of what we call, at the beginning of the report, a planetary consciousness. The idea that we have now, it's not only about globalization, it's more than that. It's having an approach of human rights based on this planetary consciousness, and this was one of the main guidelines of the writing of the report. To give only one quote, and only one quote, about the common, probably the best quote is the quote from the book that wrote our colleagues, Pierre Dardot and Christian Laval, about the common, and as a subtitle, On the Revolution on the 21st Century, and where they say, and it's a very radical position, there are no common goods. There are only commons to be institutionalized or commons to be made common. The idea that the common, it's not a thing, it's a process. It's a process of, allow me for this expression, is a process of commoning, is a process of constructing something common from different point of view, from different cultures, from different epistemologies, from different ways of thinking, from different ways of knowing, instead of this normalization that was in the social contract of the modernity in the 19th century. And so it's not anymore about normalization. It's not anymore about imposing a culture. It's about constructing, for a diversity of points of view, the process of putting something in common. And for us, in the writing of this report, this was probably the most important idea of the report, this effort, in a sense, if I can use a concept, to institute the common. And the idea of instituting the common is probably the central idea of this report and of the renewing of the social contract for education. Voila, these are the challenges we face as we navigate possible futures. Valuing the present is the only way to keep the future open, not to anticipate the future, not to control the future. It's impossible. But to embrace uncertainty as a place of possibilities. Perhaps the most important thing is to learn to navigate, and I'm going to quote again Edgar Morin, to navigate in an ocean of uncertainty. Because the future is plural and collective. Education is not a monolith. It's made of many stones, with a variety of sizes, of shapes, of colors. There are distinct compositions, different and unique, according to the circumstances of time and place, defined by individual and collective gestures. Nothing is more important than the effort to make conscious what we already know and what we already do. And that's why this report was written on the basis of thousands and thousands of experiences, thousands and thousands of things that are already being done in the world. It's not about inventing something extraordinary, inventing something that no one have thought before. It's about constructing and working with the things that we already do and that we already know. Creating spaces for conversation, creating spaces for dialogue. And that's why I told in other presentations, I remember in Barcelona, I begin my presentation of this report with playing with this very well-known painting by Magritte, where he puts a pipe and he says, "This is not a pipe." No? And I put the cover of the report and I wrote, "This is not a report." No? In a sense that it's not a traditional report. And we say it at the end of the report, this is not a report. This is an invitation for conversation, an invitation to think, to act, and to work together. In a sense, it's a conversation to try to build common stories. And that's why I could not refuse your invitation to be here with you. It's this kind of events that we are promoting around the world, inviting, discussing, criticizing, bringing new ideas that can, in a sense, give meaning to this idea of renewing the social contract for education. That's why it was important for me to be with you today, and I will be happy to follow these discussions the next hours or in the next days. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this brilliant conference again. I think that Antonio, I used to say that to him, always put our heads clearer and very, very organized. So we are much more prepared for the dangers outside. So I think this is the main idea, is the idea that the futures will be built by our own as a metamorphosis at the light of human rights. I think this is the most important message, and we have a lot of other and important ideas, notably the idea of all we must do to change is to live the process, and the process is a responsibility, I think. So we have now a moment of debate, so you can ask the questions you wish, and then you can translate probably. Thank you. So. And other people who want to, okay, two, probably 3 or 4, and then we ask Antonio to answer.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Nóvoa, for your wonderful presentation. Okay, so I'm Xiaoming Li, and I'm a lecturer at the Institute of International and Comparative Education of Beijing Normal University. It's very sophisticated, and I could, my sense is that there's this invoking of a strong sense of collectivity and commonality on the one hand, but at the same time, you also emphasize at the individual level as being different, being diverse, and the schooling as a space that is distinct and different. So I guess my confusion is how do we address the tension, the confliction within, in terms of addressing the unity in diversity. I think that's my confusion. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Mine is not a question, it's actually to reiterate. Okay. Yes. Okay. My name is Indri Asier Lumumba. I come from Côte d'Ivoire, but I have been teaching in the United States at Cornell University for many, many years. And as it was said earlier by Professor Antonio Teodoro, the Vice President of WCCES, I'm the immediate past president of WCCES. So I just want to thank you for giving full meaning to an idea that we had back in 2016 when I was elected president, that we meet every 3 years with a lot of excitement, we disappear. And this is not how you maintain a vibrant society. Ideas are needed, actions are needed. So the first symposium was organized at the University of Johannesburg, and you were present at the second symposium at IBE. You were present at the third symposium. We were hoping to come here with a lot of excitement when COVID-19 told us to do it differently. It did a lot of devastation, but it brought opportunities for using also the virtual, not as the soul, it's not possible as you clearly articulated, but as a complementary. And you were there also virtually last year when we organized the 18th Congress of WCCES. Thank you for being here. Every single time, you really make us think and you give us hope. And I just want to acknowledge that and really hope that we can continue to build that future with the kind of spirit that you bring, with the kind of engagement that you bring in as an inspiration. And I know there are young people here. This is an example that we need to emulate. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Swati Mohan Krishnan. I'm here from the Shiksha Initiative, Shiv Nadar Foundation. We work with an adult literacy intervention program in India. And my question to you revolves around the idea of what you term delusions related to the ubiquity of learning, to technology. And I wanted to ask and reduce to, in general, ICT or digital learning is seen as a very creative way to learn. But I think at some level, you're questioning the creativity that's embedded in it, right? By saying that it is a delusion, right? Because in terms of the uniform, the homogeneous graphics that seem to run across digital programs or digital forms of education, the homogeneity in a way cuts out the creativity. And the homogeneity takes the place of diversity. And I'm not just referring to, say, the color of the skin of the characters who are on screen or the clothes that they're wearing. I'm also referring to their experiences and challenges. So I was hoping you could dwell on this idea of the delusion and also look at how perhaps creativity in some ways is only of one kind when we look at digital interfaces, but other kinds of creativity are then dismissed or possibly reduced to redundancy as a result of this larger sort of universal digital program. Thank you.
Morning. Thank you. Thank you, Antonio. Thank you very much for presentation and sharing your ideas about school and schooling. Quick question. Given your vision about the school and education, What about teacher education regarding that vision? Can you say a word about that?
Hello, hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm Mukhlis Abubakar from the National Institute of Education in Singapore. Just a point that you made about schools should not be a continuation of the home, of the society, and so forth. I'm just wondering whether you could clarify, is that absolute or is it contextual? I'm speaking from the perspective of bilingual education, in particular, the risk of some languages being left behind because the school system is employing the dominant language as the medium of instruction. So if schools were not to be a continuation of home, then my point is that the school has to be something which is different because households are becoming more and more using the dominant language as the medium of instruction at the risk of losing the mother tongue language. And so if the English medium education were to continue, which is a continuation of what the home is experiencing, then the child would not be able to actually live that linguistic cultural nuances that is required for him or her to maintain that identity within the context of the global dominant language of English. And so could you just clarify to that extent? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I have no intention of, it's impossible for me to reply. That they are very important questions and very difficult questions. No? I thank you very much, Professor Naderi, for the comments, and it's a pleasure to collaborate with you and with the World Council. The other points are very difficult, and I'll try to give answers that are more a metaphor, and so try to think about them as a metaphor with all the problems of the metaphors, but to see if I can enter into dialogue in a short space of time. The first question, let me use a metaphor. For me, the best metaphor for schooling, in a sense, is an orchestra of music. No? And the orchestra of music, it's a unity. It needs harmony. It's impossible to do music and to play music in an orchestra without harmony. But it's impossible to have a good orchestra if you have not individuals and the talent of individuals playing inside. And the individuals, they are not more important than the collectivity, and the collectivity is not more important than the individual. And so the process is about unity and diversity. It's the same kind of process. Is how can we assure this kind of common idea of a process? And I prefer the term uncommon to the term collectivity. The term collective brings other imaginations. I prefer the term of commoning, no? without asphyxiating, without suffocating that individual freedom and that individuality. And so there was probably one of the most brilliant answers that have been done for the question, what is a school for? What is education for? That was an answer by a French philosopher named Olivier Reboul, and he replied with one phrase: education serves for everything that unites and everything that liberates. No? And in this idea that he wrote a whole book about that, it's this tension that in a sense was in your question. So the second question, if I understand it well, and I think that you are right when we look, for instance, about adult literacy and the historical projects of adult literacy, maybe one of the biggest, of the most important, it was the Open University in England in the 60s. It was a huge process of democratizing adult education, and it's a wonderful project. And so using distance learning, using all these kind of things. And of course that there are many important things that are doing with digital technologies, many important things with that are doing through different process of education, and it's always difficult to criticize technologies without recognizing this process. What I was trying to tell, and that's my fear in this moment, is a kind of a discourse about ubiquity of learning, saying that everything is in platforms. And these platforms are done by the oligarchs of this world, this kind of what we call imperialism platform. These are done, and then we apply them at home, we apply them in schools. Teachers don't need to think a lot. Teachers don't need to prepare documents. Teachers don't need to be, they just apply whatever. One of our colleagues says, now we have the teachers are like microwaves. No? They don't need to cook. They just apply and what is it? And so my criticism, in fact, it's not about the use of technologies. It's not about the use of technologies with creativities by teachers, by adult educators. Many times is absolutely essential. I work a lot in Brazil. Brazil, it's a huge country, and to go to everyone and to obtain, you need to use sometimes technologies. But what I'm criticizing is that kind of delusion that everything will be online and the kind of platform imperialism will dominate the world, and schools are not important anymore. We can go into different directions. And so thank you very much for your point, because your point clarifies what the use of technologies that can be very important, that can be, as in the Open University, I think 60 years ago, and it's a very important process and a very important project. It will be very difficult for me to go now into a presentation about teacher education, right? But what I say, I said it in a lecture at the University of Oporto, invited for Amélia, and it's again very simplistic. I think that we need to build teacher education that's very difficult to say in 1 minute, but using again a metaphor that I'm going to use tomorrow in the presentation of a book by the most important Portuguese educator named Sérgio Nisa, the idea that teacher education needs to be built inside the teaching profession. In a sense, now, in the last decades, teacher education is being built outside the teaching profession by academics, by universities, and it's good, by many things, but we need to put them inside the process of construction of new ways of being teachers, and teachers need to have the power of engaging in the education, in the training of the future teachers. And that's, for me, in this moment, the main point about teacher education. So it's crucial, it's very important, but it cannot be done exclusively outside the profession. It needs to have a much more important presence of the profession in the way. And so I'm advocating for a third revolution in teaching education. The first revolution, of course, was the normal schools. The second revolution was what our colleagues in France call the universitarization of teacher education. I'm calling for a third revolution, bringing the profession and giving to the profession more power in the education of future teachers. But it would be a very long presentation. I'm sorry to give a very short reply with many possibilities of being equivocal in the way how we listen to what I'm saying, but if necessary, I will get back to it again. The fourth question, for me, it's one of the most important things that in my way of thinking about schools. Because if schools were mainly a continuation of home or of families, maybe schools were not needed. Maybe now with the technologies, with the online, with all these kinds, maybe lots of families could do the education at home. No? But schools are needed because they are different from the homes. Giving again another metaphor, and I'm sorry to reply with metaphors, but it's the easy way. I came from a Catholic family, my religion. I'm not practicing it directly, but I'm from a Catholic family. And for me, it was clear that my father, my parents, they give me a Catholic education. In a sense, it was their obligation. It was their obligation. If they believe in the Catholic religion, it's normal that they bring me, that they educate me with this Catholic education. But my father, at that time, always told me one thing, that it was impossible in Portugal at that time because we're in dictatorship. He told me all the time, but at school, I want you to learn all religions. I want you to learn all cultures. I want you to learn and to open the world. I don't want the school to be the same thing that the house. One thing is what we do in house. What I'm saying, it's a kind of metaphor. And so the strength of the school, it's to give other cultures, other ideas, other perspectives, other approaches, other visions of the world that the ones that we give to our children at home. And this point, it's very important in terms of policies and in terms of politics, because many people say, no, the school needs to do what the parents want them to do. And I say, no, the parents, they have a role in the schools, but the schools are a different thing, are a different, they are done for other things, for other culture, for other projects. And this is also important in terms of languages. In fact, the diversity of languages and the capacity to deal with this diversity is one of the most important things for the future. And we need to understand that, as we say often at UNESCO, each time that a language dies, it's all a history of humanity that it's dying. Right? And the process of bilingual education, of linguistic diversity, is something that it's also in the report, and it's very important to bring. And of course, the school cannot be, and that's the difference between the social contract of the 19th century. Pierre Bourdieu wrote a whole article on that, say the linguistic unification of France in the 19th century was done through the school. And it was important for the national citizenship. But now we are not anymore in this moment. We are in a different moment. And the renewing of the social contract of education needs to take it into consideration. And I fully agree with your point. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Now we can proceed with another round of questions. Okay. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for your insightful and very inspiring lecture. My name is Kwanish. I came from Japan, but I am originally from Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is a country in Central Asia, former Soviet Union, one of the former Soviet Union states. And my question is about the decolonization of knowledge, because everything what you've taught about the modern school, the school that we have now, it's based on the Western philosophy, on the Christian preaching method of teaching and so on. So I guess this symposium and all world councils, they are always about the re-evaluation, re-appreciation of the local knowledges, of the local ways of knowing. So, and when you mentioned about these new educational environments or the convergence curriculum, I guess it's also about the rediscovering local knowledges as well. But from this kind of talks, like, for example, reimagining the education or other conferences, I think we do not pay real attention to the local knowledges. So yeah, my question is about how far the local knowledges can be reimagined because of the new centuries threats and so on. Thank you.
Thank you for that brilliant presentation. My name is Awa Saidi. Thank you. Thank you for that brilliant presentation. My name is Awa Saidi. I am originally from the Gambia. I'm both administrator and faculty at the University of Minnesota. I have few questions, but I will do my two key ones. One of them has to do with the concept of schooling and education. And I think the two concepts are used interchangeably many a times, but I think it's important that we always clarify what is schooling and what is education, because I think if we kind of embark on this, I think most of the time it would reduce the confusion, right? So I think I would love to hear your version of what exactly is schooling and what is education, just in simple terms. The other thing is you mentioned that about 15% of students who are supposed to be in school are out of school, and of the 249 million poorly prepared, 85% of them poorly prepared. Now, of the 3 C's that you mentioned, your 3 C's, I am from the part of the world where we know that majority of students in the world reside, out of school students reside in that part of the world. How does your 5 C's kind of contextualize the reality of that? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nóvoa, for a wonderful presentation and sharing with 5C conceptual framework. That is very useful. I think my question is, what exactly you are dreaming the futures of education in the changing world? Because already many participants mentioned about many things. Many issues are still we are dealing with, from peace to harmony, then infrastructure, the bridging gap, all these issues are there. How you are dreaming the futures of education? and what role you are expecting from various WCCES associations, comparative education societies, and even many teachers associations are there. Many organizations are working in the field of education. Not only government organization, but many NGOs are also playing very crucial roles. What you are dreaming in to achieve the whatever called quality or good futures of education. Thank you very much.
We need to end the debate, and now we have the answer.
Thank you for your 3 questions. I'm going to try to answer it in a simple way. The first question is very, in fact, it's very important, and it was one of the main discussions in the International Commission. One of our main discussions, and the International Commission was formed by 18 people from China, Japan, to Latin America, to Africa, of course. And it was one of our main discussions also because one of the most important members of the International Commission, it was a woman from an indigenous community in Peru, in Latin America, Tarsila, and she was very active in the discussions of the commission, and she was all the time asking your questions, and so your questions, and in fact, in many moments of the report, the idea of different epistemologies of knowledge, recognizing local knowledge, recognizing it was all the time. It is written in many parts of the report, but always with attention, right? Attention with some other colleagues from the International Commission. I remember, for instance, I don't remember now the name, but it was the former president of Lithuania that was one of the members of the International Commission. I don't remember the name, and one colleague from Harvard University, Fernando Reimers, that he was originally from Venezuela, but he's working in the United States for a long time, always with 2 tensions that for us were very important. The first tension was, of course, we need to recognize this. Of course, we cannot, and that's one of the main features of the renewing the social contract, because we all know what was the social contract of the 19th century, in this kind of normalization, uniformization. I always play asking people, but why the teacher education institutions all around the world were called normal schools? Because that was the point. It was to normalize. It was to normalize everything: the school, the curriculum, the pedagogy, the culture, the knowledge, the language, and so on. And the 2 tensions are, yes, but always having in mind that we don't want to close, in a sense, the children's only inside the local cultures and the local communities. The idea of Michel Serres, that we need to present all the world to the children. And so we need to be very careful in terms of recognizing the importance of local communities and local cultures and local knowledge without closing the children's area. And so presenting them with all the humanity and with all the ways of thinking, and giving them the right to choose what kind of way they want to do. And that was one tension that appears a lot in the report. And the second tension, and I'm particularly interested in this second tension, is the idea that today we need to defend and we need to protect science. As I know that what I'm going to say, it's very difficult for some people to hear. but as a kind of a universal language. And the idea that science, with all the problems we know, all the appropriations of science, all the bad appropriations of technologies and everything, but we are in a moment of our world with negationism, with fake news, where science, as George Steiner says, George Steiner had a very nice saying. He say, the most important universal language is music, and the second one is science. No? And the idea that we need to protect. And so the report has in many moments these tensions. The tensions that we need to value local common, local knowledge, different epistemology of knowing, but with these two tensions that appear in many moments of the program. And as you can understand, this is an international commission of 18 people that think very differently. And I know exactly paragraph by paragraph who wrote that paragraph and why and what. And so this is not a report written by one person. This is not a report with the coherence of one person writing it. It's a kind of mixing very different positions. I understand very well what we say about schooling and education. Of course, that was my education when I was to Geneva, very young, and I have done all my career as a student at the University of Geneva. I think that the main debate at that moment was that discussion in the 80s about schooling and about education. Education is different from schooling, or schooling is not the same thing. And I recognize that in this moment when I talk, I don't make enough the differentiation between the things. But one of the reasons is because I think that in this moment that we are talking, schools are being attacked and public schools are being attacked. And the main tendencies around the world, no? From companies, from the world industry of education and so on, is a kind of an attack on schools and in public schools, trying to build other forms of education, alternative forms of education, alternative education. And so these concepts that for me in the 80s were absolutely central. If you wrote what my texts in the beginning of the 80s, it was all about alternative education, other forms of doing education, not only schools, criticizing school education. I'm not anymore in this moment, because this is a kind of ideology that was taken by other projects of education. And I think that in this moment, a person like Ivan Illich, for instance, when he wrote Society Without Schools, no? He will never write this kind again, never. No. In fact, by the end of his life, he told it was a tragedy to write this book. And he wrote the book for very good reasons, more liberating ideas and so on. But we are in a different moment of societies. And so I understand exactly what you are saying, and I agree with you. But for me, I'm in a moment where we need to protect the schools and all kind of alternative discourses. And so the alternative, I want to do it inside the public schools. No? And that's where your second question comes. Again, a metaphor. If the school is organized in terms of classes, I give my class of history, my class of biology, and so on, to 20 students, I can forget some of them. The students that are in the last rows, I'm talking without... And so the idea of inclusion, it's very difficult in the structure, in the organizational structure of the classroom, And that's why we need new school environments. And when I talk about cooperation, one of the reasons, because I stress the idea of cooperation, is that if you organize the pedagogical work around tables with 4 or 5 students working together in cooperation, it's very difficult to forget someone. It's very difficult to lose someone because you are there sitting in the same table as a metaphor, working together. And so the idea of inclusion is directly related with the idea of the pedagogy of cooperation. And cooperation is directly related with inclusion and with the idea that we cannot lose half of our students. We cannot say that school is brilliant and school is a brilliant institution and losing half of the students. You can imagine a doctor that kills half of the patients. It's impossible that you can say, I'm a very good doctor, but I kill half of my patients. So we need to have, and for me, exactly the idea of that inclusion, of that rhetorics of education for all, etc., cannot be attained without a different pedagogical approach, mainly based on the idea of cooperation. And that's what I stressed a lot, this idea. But it's very difficult to answer your last question, but for me, the dream is in the 5 C's. So for me, the dream, in a sense, is to have schools, not to lose schools. So I don't, in this moment, I think our grand danger is to lose the schools and to go to other forms of education that will be much more privatized, much more consumeristic, and much more technological driven in the bad sense. Aim with the school where these 5 C's can really be applied. And so a school where cooperation is the basis of the school. And so I enter in a school, I don't see teachers giving classes. I see students work with other students and with the teacher. And so the idea of the work of cooperation, a curriculum convergence. I enter in a school, I don't see a teacher giving classes of history, of mathematics, but I see the students working in some projects, in some ideas, for instance, in the Sustainable Development Goals, working about the water or about the energy or about other things with the discipline, of course, but working in convergence. A school where I see the teachers collaborating, but not collaborating because we oblige them, but collaborating because the work is organized like that, because there are an organization of the work that naturally implies a collaboration between the teachers. No? A school where the point of conviviality, it's a central point, and so where children learn to live with other children, with different children, with diversity, where the exclusion doesn't exist, where violence doesn't exist, and so where we can teach the students to work in a convivial environment, and where we try to build ideas of the common, and so we try to build the idea that to educate, to have a common humanity, you need to educate people in common. And so the best I can say to you in terms of dreams is that. And but maybe I can say a final word, and the final word is that these dreams are already reality in many of other schools. Right? And so these dreams are not only dreams; these dreams happen. And one of the things, I give many lectures in Brazil, which is a very difficult country for many reasons, for all the movement of privatization, all the movement, the old industry. It's the country where the world industry is more powerful in the world, is Brazil. So it's a very difficult country. But the thing that gives me more pleasure is at the end of a lecture, sometimes Paulo knows, with 2,000 teachers, 3,000 teachers, sometimes in gymnasiums with thousands of people, is when someone comes to me and say, but Professor, I enjoyed your lecture, but you know, most of the things that you say, we are all doing it in our schools. No? It's not a novelty. It's nothing. We were expecting novelties. And I say, I have no novelty to say. There are no novelties in education. There are no novelties in pedagogy. Everything has already been invented. The question is how to put it into place. And last year, Amelia knows it because I have been talking with her. Last year, I decided to stop during 2 months, my life. During 2 months, I put in my car, and during 2 months, I visit public schools in Portugal. Without no agenda, without no planning, without don't telling to the people that I was there. So I arrived to the schools. I said, can I talk with the dean of the school? I'm here. What are you doing here? Can I visit the school? So without no preparation, and I visit around 60 public schools in 2 months. So 1 school per day. And I saw many of these things already being done. And so it's not something that it's only a dream. It's a dream, but it's a dream of things that are already being done. And I think that the best that World Council can do and our societies can do, it's what Simone Weil wrote to Alain. It's a professor, and Alain wrote to her one letter saying, now that you have finished your PhD, that you have accomplished so many in research, what would you like to do? And she wrote to him saying, probably the best thing that I would like to do now in my life is to reflect with other people, with other researchers, about things that we already do and that we already know, but we need to reflect more about that. And in a sense, do what Edgar Morin in the text of Metamorphosis say. He was telling there are thousands of things extraordinary in the world. He was not talking about education, but in education it's the same thing. Thousands of things, but there is not yet, these things are not yet related, are not yet together in a movement of transformation. So what we need is a movement in the world. It's a movement of people, and to do this movement, we need to go from the isolated experiences and to bring them into a more global consciousness and bringing them into a movement of transformations. All things that I have said here are already being done in many, many schools around the world. We need to give them more visibility and a more bigger audience, and to bring them into a movement of transformation. The idea of this report was an invitation towards this process of transformation of schools. That's my dream. Thank you.
Thank you for this excellent moment, and for you, thank you too for the excellent questions. Thank you.